Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. In a previous video I did a tabletop review of the Pieta LeMat cavalry revolver, just like this. And in this video I'm going to cover how to make paper cartridges for the 20 gauge shotgun barrel on these pistols in a style like this. So let's get it over to the table and I'll show you how to do it. Alright, now we're over at the workbench, so to speak. Here's my cartridge forming kit, and inside we'll find a mandrel, a kind of a stand for a mandrel, and a choking cord, and a cutout template. So this we'll use to cut out the rolling paper. So let's set everything aside here. Now outside of those tools, you'll also need some craft paper, kind of that newsprint consistency. You can find it on Amazon or any number of places. And that's what we'll use to roll up our tubes. You'll want to have some kind of a nitro card. In my case, I'm just using like 3D printed discs, but you can use a 20 gauge nitro card or something similar. And you'll want to have some string. This is 1mm linen string. That's quite a decent option in that it's a strong enough string, but it's also thin enough that it won't make too bulky of a cartridge. You'll also want some glue. Stick glue works fine, and a pencil, of course, for tracing out your papers. So first we'll take the template in our paper and we'll go ahead and trace out the shape of our cartridge. Here I'll make up 2 envelopes because I just have enough paper to do that, I think. And then I'll just cut these out and I'll be right back. And here we're back with 3 cutout sheets. We'll set 2 of them aside and we'll just proceed with this one. Now what I'm going to do is flip it over so that the long end of the template here is to the left, with the kind of corner formed here over to the left and then the short end to the right. So you want kind of the angle at the top of the sheet. Next, you want to take your rolling mandrel and we'll place it about a ½ inch away from the edge here. And now I'm going to move this out of frame a bit, but I'm just grabbing the edge of the paper like this. And now I'm going to very tightly, or as tightly as I can, roll this around the rod. And in fact, if you wanted to, you could push the rod all the way up. We don't necessarily need it away from that edge quite yet, but I'll show you why I mentioned that in just a minute. So I'm taking the paper and I'm just very tightly winding it around the rod, and I'm going to take my glue and we'll start applying it to this edge now. Some people don't use glue at all. They're just kind of relying on the tightness of the roll to keep everything together, but I am not that good. So I am going to just glue this edge here. And unlike the combustible cartridges that you find in typical revolvers, these aren't really combustible. They're kind of treated more like wadding, so it doesn't really matter if you use a combustible glue or not in this case. So we're just going to press this edge down so everything's a nice kind of flattened out form, so we have a nice cylinder. Okay, and see, now that's the completed cylinder. So we'll take our mandrel out and we'll let that glue dry. And I'm going to go ahead and form up 2 more of these out of those sheets that I cut out, and we'll come back to this when this glue is dry. Alright, now I've got 3 of these tubes made up and our glue's dried a little bit. So we'll take the first tube and we'll start doing the end choke. And the way that's done is we'll use our choking tool. We'll put our mandrel down in the hole here, and we're going to use this choking cord with its handle to kind of crimp the end of this cartridge. So we'll slide our paper tube down onto the mandrel just about until it hits the top of this, and that should place it at a decent distance away from the top of the mandrel. In fact, maybe get a little closer. And that should just be about right. Now I'm going to place this in here, and I'm going to put my finger right down in that gap as I choke this. So I'm going to wrap this around 2 or 3 times. We'll place the finger in there. We'll make sure it's kind of at the right level. And we'll grab a handle and just pull it. And we might need to adjust our mandrel a bit. That's all right, and we can wrap it again. And we'll just pull that handle. And we'll crimp down that end nice and tight, keeping the finger down in there so that the top of the crimp doesn't collapse in on itself, as it'll collapse inward and then the string doesn't have anywhere to grab. Okay, so we've got a nice start to our crimp. We'll pull out the mandrel just a bit more and we'll choke it down until there's basically no gap left in the center. Now we'll unroll our choking cord and we have a nice crimp on the end of our cartridge tube that we can now tie. So we'll take our string and we'll take our cartridge and mandrel and we'll just make a simple square knot here. Okay, and we'll cut off this extra string here. And we'll leave the remainder on the roll. So go ahead and disregard this part about leaving the remainder of the string on the roll. Just cut it off. I'll explain here in a minute why. And now we'll flip over our cartridge and we'll take the mandrel out and set it aside. And now we can start filling this with our shot. So I've got some of the buckshot that I'm using on the table. This is 28 caliber ball. I think it's 283 or 284. In any case, you can find it on Track of the Wolf. So what we'll do here from now on is we're going to load up 15 of these balls, and they're going to be in tiers kind of like this, sort of in a triangle. So we'll make the first tier now. We'll drop it down into the tube, shake it about a little bit, and that'll hopefully flatten them out into a nice triangle. You can kind of peer down into the tube. You may not be able to see it on camera, but you should be able to see them sort of flatten out alongside each other. Now, to keep all this straight, I will take kind of the flat end of the mandrel and work it in gently. And it'll push it down a bit just to flatten out the balls. Next, we'll pull the mandrel back, allowing for some gap for this next layer of string to be tied around. So we can either use our choke cord or we can just use the string that we have attached to our roll here, and that's what I'm going to do to wrap it around and choke around this layer of shot. And bear with me here, this is a tedious process and I am definitely an amateur. Okay, there, we've choked it down. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm not very good at tying these knots. There's ways that you can run a single continuous knot all the way down this. I'm not really sure how to do that, so I'm just going to do it the simpler way in my mind, at least. And that is, we'll just cut the string here, and we'll start over. And this way we get a very nice tight crimp at the top, so our bottom layer of shot doesn't fall out, and we'll just make a square knot. Okay. And then we'll do the same for the next layer. We'll just take a length of string, and I'm just going to tie it around where we've already kind of choked. And again, I'm just going to use a square knot, crimp it down nicely, and it keeps everything, in my mind at least, fairly simple. Okay, we'll do the same here. We'll trim off the excess. Okay, now what we'll do is add the next layer of shot. And I'm going to basically do the same process 5 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tiers. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera since you now see the kind of basic gist of this. And I'll get back to you when we're ready for the next step, which is to add our wad at the bottom. Okay, now we're back having tied all 5 layers of this thing. I noticed I got a loose string there. Just trim that. And I've tied each layer individually, and again, there's better ways to tie it, but that's just how I do it and how I can brain my way through it. There's a little triad of shot on the very top layer. Now, if you were to charge this cartridge right now with powder, all that powder would trickle down in between the layers of shot. So it's necessary to place some kind of a wad in there. So I'll just kind of carefully start the disc with my thumb in the top of the cartridge, and I'm going to try not to cant it over, although that's much easier said than done. But we'll use our mandrel again to guide it in. And that'll help to flatten it out. Apply a little bit of pressure and get it pressed down right on top of the shot. So now what we'll do, one last time, is we'll take our cartridge, we'll set it down in our little holder. We'll take a length of string, and we'll just tie in the top of that wad. That way it's kind of crimped into place just like the shot is. We'll flip it around to the other side and we'll do a square knot kind of on the opposite side of where we did our first little hitch. That way we can crimp it down more on the opposite side as well. Okay. And with that, our wad's now in place. We'll trim off the excess. Okay, and now we have all 5 tiers of shot. That's 15 little 28 caliber balls and a wad. And that's our barrier between the powder charge and the rest of the cartridge. And now the next style of cartridge that we'll cover is called buck and ball, and that's where we're taking 3 little buckshots and 1 60 caliber ball, and again these come from Track of the Wolf. And I'm just going to take this cartridge that I've already got choked down and crimped on the end, and it starts very much the same way as a typical buckshot cartridge. We'll take 3 of our buckshot balls and we'll drop them down in our tube. Shake it around as usual. And just as before, we'll use the mandrel to kind of guide the shot where it needs to go. We've retracted it just a little bit to make a space between the buckshot balls and our mandrel so that we can tie a cord around it just as we did before. Tie it as tightly as you can and give it a square knot. Now we'll trim off the ends. And we'll add the ball on top of the shot. Take our mandrel out. We'll take one of our 60 caliber balls and we'll get it started. These fit very tightly in these tubes that I've made. So we'll go ahead and gently start it with a finger. And you can see it's just about a ½ inch in there. Now what we'll do is take our mandrel and push it in with the help of our mandrel. Now what that'll do, if you keep your fingers above the ball and kind of on the mandrel, is it'll help preserve the structure of your tube. You're not going to collapse your tube as you push the ball down. Okay, now our ball's reached the bottom. We can kind of feel it down here. We felt it hit the bottom. And we can figure out about where the bottom of the ball is, because we've got the rounded end of the mandrel in here. So we've got a sense of where to tie it next. And just as before, we're going to tie a tier around this ball. Now we've got our shot and our ball in here. As before, we'll take a wad. We'll start it. and we'll push it in with the dowel just as we did before, pushing it all the way down to the ball. And again, just as we did before, we will make a tier of it. And that is our finished buck and ball cartridge. Feels like that's a lot simpler to make because you don't have quite as many tiers to tie off. But just to review, we've got 3 buckshot, a 60 caliber ball, a wad, and then space for our powder charge. Okay, and now for the final style of cartridge here, I've got yet another tube and just a single 60 caliber ball. So this is just a ball load. This is by far the simplest method. As before, we'll start the ball, put the rounded end of our mandrel on top, and guide it in. Again, keeping our fingers kind of on that mandrel. And just as before, we'll kind of find the top of the ball. And we'll tie it off. And that's it. We don't need to add a wad on top of this ball at all. There shouldn't really be any need for that. And as before, the rest of this tube is for a powder charge. Okay, and now for the final step of this process, I've gone ahead and filled these with powder. I'm using 45 grains in this case because we're only going to be using these in the LeMat, so very short 6-inch barrel or something like that. If you're going to use them in a longer barreled shotgun, of course, you could add more of a powder charge. So having added the powder, the next step is to now fold this closed. So we'll find kind of the top of the charge, which is about there, just by lightly pinching it. And then we'll fold it flat. So first I'm going to push in, as I'm folding this to the side, I'm pushing this in. Okay, so I'm kind of pressing on the powder column a bit to compress it, and also to kind of create these wings on each side. And that's important for the next step. So we'll flatten out the remainder of this paper here that's not full powder, and those wings will start to want to fold in the sides, and that's kind of an important step here because that helps us to seal in the cartridge. So we'll take those wings and fold them over all the way down to the end, just like that. We'll do the same on the other side. Okay. Having done that, we can now fold the rest of the tail end of this thing down along the edge of the cartridge. So we'll use that same technique on the other 2 cartridges. So now that we've done that, we've got 3 different types. We've got a ball, a buck and ball, and a buckshot loaded up and ready to go for the LeMat revolver. I hope you enjoyed this look at making traditional paper cartridges for LeMat revolvers and really any other kind of smoothbore or shotgun muzzleloader. If you liked the video, give it a like and subscribe, and be sure to check me out on surlyspossibles.com if you're interested. Thanks for watching.